Garage door opener misbehaving? Mine too. So in this video, I'm walking through my entire system, troubleshooting some of the common issues for my first time, and out of that, hopefully coming up with some good tips to help you fix yours. Hey everyone, I'm Zach. Welcome to First Timers. I have two garage door openers that are in need of a lot of help. And if you're troubleshooting for the first time like I am, it can look complicated. You might not be sure where to start. So I'm gonna try to simplify that as much as possible. But if you think you already know where the problem is, there are some links in the description below to jump to specific topics in the video. Also, we're a new channel. One of our goals is to help other homeowners and first timers take on projects and maintenance tasks like this on their own, hopefully saving some time and some money in the process. So if you find this video helpful, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up. It lets us know that these videos are helpful for you, and it also helps us spread the word. Thanks. So the first thing, let's cover some key anatomy real quick. Anatomy of a garage door opener. It'll be useful to know in terms of diagnosing behavior later on. Okay, let's do this. The power head assembly. This contains the motor assembly, the motor drive board, the control board, light bulbs. If your system has a capacitor, it'll be in there. You can also usually find the model and serial numbers in there. Then there is the rail assembly, which provides support for the trolley and some of the drive system like the belts, screws, or wires. And this is also where you'll find the limit switches. Then there's the trolley itself, and this is the thing that actually connects to the door and is driven by the drive system that opens and closes it. Then there's the open limit switch, which tells things where to stop when the door is opening. And then the close limit switch, which tells things where to stop when the door is closing. Then there are the sensors. These tell things to stop if the door is closing and something breaks the beam going under the door. Then there are the wall consoles. Some have a vacation lock, otherwise just a button to open and close the door or turn on the light. And obviously the remotes. So the first thing I'm doing is looking up the make and model of my opener so that I can download the owner's manuals, because some of these systems like mine will have the LEDs on various parts of the system blink a code at you, and that'll be helpful to look up and diagnose the issue. So to find the make, usually it's pretty easy. It's often printed on the outside, like you can see here. To find the model number though, sometimes you need to pop open the lighting cover. Usually there's a couple tabs, real easy, and check out the stickers on the inside. The next thing I'm gonna do is identify the drive type. The four common types are going to be screw-driven, belt-driven, chain-driven, and wall-mounted. The wall-mounted aren't really like the other three, so I'm not gonna be covering those in this video. To find out which kind you have, look at your rail assembly, and you'll see either a belt stretched from end to end between two pulleys, a chain, or inside of the rail, you'll see a screw, like you do here on mine. All right, on to actually troubleshooting. I'm going to begin with a quick visual inspection of everything. I'm going to check the vacation locks to make sure they weren't accidentally turned on. I'm also going to check my breaker box to see if anything has tripped for any reason. All right, next I'm going to check the doors for any signs of obvious mechanical failures, broken rollers, bent tracks like something might have hit them, broken belts or chains, or anything that could be jamming the door like a shovel or a bike leaning on it. I'm also going to check the sensors to see if there are any obvious issues like they've been clearly broken, become detached, and check the LEDs to see if they're blinking any codes. I'm also going to check the LEDs inside of the power head assembly. Some of the manufacturers will have these blink a code that you can look up in the owner's manual to help figure out what the problem is. I clearly have an issue with these sensors or something on this unit. So next, I'm gonna get into sensors a little more. All right, sensors are a common problem because they're exposed, they get dirty, they can get hit easily. Signs that you might have a sensor problem are if the LED is flashing on it like they are on mine, or if the door has already been opened, but you try to close it and it starts to close but then stops. Some of them will have the light flash, some don't, like mine doesn't. But you can still close the door if you hold the button down on the wall console, like this. All right, to show you what I'm talking about, I'm gonna block the sensor. You can see that it's blocked and blinking, but if we push and hold down the button, the door closes. One thing to note also with the sensor LEDs is that just because one of them is red doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong with it. Some brands will use a red LED and a green LED to delineate the source node and the receiver, which is how mine is set up. If you think you're having some sensor issues, some things you can do are check for a blocked beam path. This can be caused either by an object or a dirty sensor. It might be indicated by a blinking LED light, or the LED light might even remain dark entirely, depending on the brand and model of your system. If you don't see anything obvious blocking the beam, clean the sensors by wiping them down with a soft, damp cloth and see if that fixes the issue. Sometimes they get dirty enough that the sensor thinks they're blocked. You can also check for alignment between the source and the sensor. You're gonna wanna check both the vertical alignment as well as the lateral alignment. These ones look pretty well aligned. And once you realign them, you may need to unplug your system and plug it back in to get it reset. So that didn't fix mine, and if it didn't fix yours, some other things we can check are the cable connections at the sensors and in the power head assembly. To do this, make sure your system's unplugged from the outlet. Then check the wires going into the back of the sensor. They shouldn't be loose or kinked. You shouldn't be able to pull them out easily. You can see these ones are well attached, and they shouldn't be broken. And one other thing you can check are the staplers and other fasteners that are holding the wires to the wall. These could have pierced through the insulation on the wire and could be causing issues there. If you do find an issue with the loose wire, if yours are like mine, all you have to do is use a screwdriver, loosen the screw, make sure you have enough exposed wire, wrap it around, and then tighten the screw back down so that there's good contact. Your owner's manual will also tell you how to do this. And if you haven't already, you can check the cables at the terminals on the power head assembly itself. You don't want to pull on these super hard, but you can check them to see if they're loose, and if they come out easily, that's a sign that could be your issue. Each of these are a little different. Yours, you may have to open up the plastic housing to get to your terminals. You can refer to your owner's manual, it'll tell you where they're at. So unfortunately, none of that actually fixed my problem. And if you're still having issues, another thing to check is actually sun interference, especially if you're having issues at a particular time of day. So check to see if the sun is hitting the lens of the sensor directly when the door is open during the time of the day that you're noticing the problem. It can cause the sensor to malfunction. Moving or shielding the sensors can help fix this. They should be set up similar to the diagram where the sun is least likely to hit them. So if like mine and none of that actually fixed your issues, you may just need to replace the sensors. Sometimes they do go bad. You can get replacements usually sold in pairs for around $20 to $40. All right, so remotes. A sign that you might have a remote problem is if the remote won't open the door. You can see this one's totally dead, but you can still open the door with the wall console. So first we can check the battery. It might be old or having issues. For some models, you may need to split open the case to get to the battery. You're gonna wanna check and make sure that it's the right size. You can find the right size in your owner's manual, and I've put links to a lot of the common brands in the description below. Also, if you got your remote like I did, maybe through the sale of a house and it's really old, you might just wanna replace it. Another thing to check are the contacts. If the remote has been dropped, these could be bent. They may not be making good contact with the battery. If the battery stuff is all good, check the buttons. You should hear and feel a nice click. If they feel mushy, they don't move easily, or they don't click, the button pad may be jammed, or it may be having trouble contacting the actual button that's mounted to the board inside of the remote. You can also pop open your remote to check the board on the inside. To do this, some of them are gonna have a screw, some others are gonna have a case that you can crack open with a coin or a screwdriver, and some other ones you'll be able to slide apart. It's gonna depend on the model that you have, so you can check your owner's manual for that. But once you get your remote open, you can check the board for any cracks. You can check the buttons themselves to see if they're broken, and you can check the button pads to see if they're jammed or if there's any dirt. that could be causing any issues. If you find a broken board, you're probably gonna have to buy a new remote. But if the board and everything else looks fine, like mine does, I can't find anything wrong with this, then another thing we can check is the antenna position. If you have an older system like I do, your antenna is probably gonna be a wire that's hanging down somewhere, like you can see here on mine. It should be unobstructed and free. It shouldn't be wrapped around anything or blocked by any metal objects. If everything looks good there, you may need to also check the antenna attachment inside of the power head assembly. To do this, pop open your power head assembly like I have here and take a look inside to see if you have an antenna viewing port like I do. If you don't have a viewing port, you may need to remove this inner black lining. Usually there's 4 or 5 screws that you can remove and it'll pop out. You can take a look in there to see if the antenna has become detached. So on this one, I don't know if you can see it, but that little wire right there is the antenna that mounts to the board, and it looks good. So another thing that could be causing issues with remotes are actually the light bulbs. So if you have LEDs in your garage or around your home, they could be causing interference. A lot of garage door opener remotes actually operate on radio frequencies, and sometimes LEDs can emit radio frequency interference. There are a lot of LED bulbs that are actually marketed for garage use because they provide better shielding and kind of reduce the interference issues. Many of the opener brands will actually sell these LED bulbs, but generally any higher end LED light bulb should reduce the interference issues. You can identify these higher end bulbs by looking for the FCC logo. They are a bit more expensive per bulb, kind of averaging around the $10 at least at the time of this video. And you can easily get them from most of the home improvement stores. So I've checked the one remaining bulb in my openers and it is FCC certified. Another thing you can try is reteaching in the remote, or if you've bought a new one like I have, teach it in for the first time. So in order to reteach your remote, your opener is gonna have a button on it somewhere for learning. Mine is right here. So I'll hit that. It'll indicate that it's ready to learn. And then I'll hit the button on the remote that I wanna use. And it will confirm that it is taught in and we're ready to go. I don't have a keypad, but if you do, you can think of it as basically just another remote. You can confirm that the keypad might not be working if you can open the garage door with the wall console, but not with the keypad. Some things to check on the keypad are basically the same as with the remote. You can check the battery in it, you can check the keys to make sure that they're not stuck or jammed, and you can try to reprogram that keypad with the opener and see if that fixes the issue. And if none of that worked, just as with the remote, you just might need to buy a new one. Keypads are outside, they're exposed to the elements, they go through a lot of cycles, and sometimes they just get old and stop working. All right, let's talk about wall consoles real fast. Some signs that you may have an issue with your wall console are that you can open the door with the remote, but not with the wall console. I don't know if you can see it, but the LED light is also out on this one, but not on this one. And then another symptom is that if you close the garage with the wall console, but then the light stays on for some reason, which mine does, then that could indicate something wrong inside the wall console as well. Okay, so to start with these, I'm just gonna make sure the buttons aren't jammed and these ones click fine and they're moving freely. And the LED light's also out on the back of this one, so I think there's something bigger going on. So to troubleshoot this, I'm gonna pop this off the wall, but before I do, I'm gonna make sure that I've unplugged the system from the outlet where the power head assembly is. All right, so I've taken the screws out, I've got this thing off the wall, and you can see on the back side that there's a board in there with 2 wires that connect all the way to the power head assembly unit. And the board itself looks fine. I've kind of pulled on these a little bit, very gently. There's nothing loose. And so I think this one just may need to be replaced. Another thing to check if your door is not working properly are the mechanical systems. Some signs of mechanical issues are things like the door tries to open but stops, struggles, or reverses. Or there are a lot of loud noises like clanking and banging and screeching when the door is opening. First though, before you start checking these things, make sure you unplug the system just in case somebody comes home while you're doing this and your hands are in the door. That'd not be good. Once it's all safe, a good place to start is checking the door balance. To check the balance, first make sure the door is closed. For safety, it's important to start this with the door closed. If you start this with the door open and it's out of balance for any reason, it can come down pretty hard and either damage itself or hurt somebody. Okay, and then release the emergency release by pulling on the handle attached to the trolley. And once you've pulled the emergency release from the trolley and you can move the door freely with your hands, pull it up about 3 to 4 feet and slowly let it go. If the door hangs and kind of floats there by itself, then it's properly balanced. And if it doesn't and it sinks back down to the ground or falls back down to the ground, the door is out of balance. So as you can see, that door is completely out of balance. I can't even let it go without it falling down to the ground. I checked my other door, it's the same. You'll know if your door's in balance because as you gently let it go, it should just suspend itself without you having to hold on to it. If your door is out of balance like mine are, it's probably related to the spring setup. The purpose of the springs is to be there to offset the weight of the door to kind of relieve some of the mechanical stress on the motors and things like that. So that's a good place to start looking. The first step is going to be figuring out the type of door and spring setup that you have. For the doors, it'll most likely be a sectional door like you see behind me, or a one-piece door. And the spring setup will likely be either a torsion spring, which are the springs usually on bars directly above the door, or an extension spring setup like mine, which have springs that run along the rails, or a trackless setup, which are common on the one-piece doors. For torsion springs, a good place to start is just looking at it. You shouldn't see any breaks in it, and it should look like one nice symmetrical coil. If the torsion spring looks good, it might just need to be tightened. If you have extension springs like I do, there's also going to be cables and pulleys as part of that system. You want to give those a look and make sure nothing's become twisted, nothing's become detached, a cable hasn't come out of a pulley or broken. Check the springs themselves and their contact points, see if anything is bent, stretched, moved, or broken. Also, as you look at the springs, they should have a nice uniform symmetrical pattern. There shouldn't be big gaps in it. If you see that, the spring may have stretched. The spring should also not be overly saggy. If you have a one-piece door, check the springs to ensure they're still connected and nothing has become bent, broken, like maybe it got hit by a car or something. Also inspect the rest of the mechanical setup to see if anything has become bent, loose, or detached. If you do find something wrong with your spring system, it might be worth calling a professional. There's a lot of stored energy in these systems and it can make things difficult and unsafe. Another thing you can check is the door and track alignment. Check the position of the rollers within the tracks. There should be enough room for them to freely move, with a decent, somewhat evenly spaced gap around the roller and the track. Also, stand back and look at the tracks relative to each other in the door. They should be nice and parallel. If there are any major angles, they can cause the door to jam as it goes up and down. Also, check the tracks from the side. They should be aligned with each other. If they're not, it can cause the door to twist as it goes up and down. If you do find some out of alignment, you can adjust them by adjusting these bolts that you see on your brackets that mount the tracks to the wall. The bolts mounted directly to the wall, all you need to do is loosen them. You don't need to take them all the way out, but loosen them enough so that you can slide the bracket left and right along this slot. Same thing here to adjust the tracks in and out. In addition to track alignment, you can also check the individual roller and track health. You shouldn't find any loose or crooked rollers. You can see this one here is crooked. Should look more like this. You can also check the track transitions. They should be nice and aligned and you shouldn't see any large gaps. If needed, you can see you can make adjustments here to align them. You can also check the rollers for cleanliness and lubrication. If there's excessive dirt in them, it can make it difficult for them to roll. As you can see here, this one's pretty dirty and obviously needs to be cleaned. You can clean them using a brush or drying spray cleaner. And for lubrication, after you clean it, Jeannie recommends using a silicone spray. And then in terms of frequency, Jeannie actually recommends cleaning and lubricating these rollers about every month or so. So another thing that's good to check is the drive system. So if you haven't already, identify the type of system you have. Is it a belt, chain, or screw driven? Some clues that your drivetrain might need some attention are a lot of noise, especially for chains. If you hear a lot of loud clanking when the door is opening or closing and you see the chain bouncing a lot, that could mean the chain is too loose and the chain is banging on the rail as it's opening, which is where the noise is coming from. If you hear a lot of gear noise when the door is opening or closing, the belt could also be too loose, just as with a chain. So to check chain tightness, look at the center of the rail where the chain droops the most. The chain should be about 1/4 inch or so above the bottom of the rail. That number differs depending on what system you have and what brand you have. But if the chain is below the rail, that's definitely a sign the chain is too loose. It's similar for belts, but belts use a spring mechanism to tension, so it's a little different to tighten them than with the chain. So refer to your owner's manual for proper tightness and how to check that. As you're working through checking and adjusting tightness, just be sure not to over tighten the belts or chains because it can apply too much pressure to the system. And sometimes there's plastic gears and other components that'll wear out prematurely if there's too much tension. If you have a screw model like I do, you want to check and make sure that the screw hasn't broken or cracked, or that any couplers haven't been broken or come detached. If yours hasn't been cleaned in a while, like mine here, you may need to clean off some of this old lubricant, which has collected a lot of dirt in my case, and then apply some new lubricant. You can see here, mine's a Genie, and they actually recommend that the screws be cleaned and re-lubricated once a year. And a quick note on the lubricant, Genie actually provides a lithium grease for this, and they actually don't recommend using something like a silicone spray. Also, a quick note, if you've never had a screw drive like this before and you're curious how it works, here's what happens. So up in there is the electric motor that attaches to the shaft, and then down the entire shaft there's this big long screw that rotates when you hit the garage door opener and the motor turns on, and that screw drives the trolley, which has the same threads on it. All right, so if you've tried everything else in this video and nothing else has worked, then there are a couple other things we can try. They're a little bit more in depth, but a good place to start is checking if the system has power. So some common signs of power issues are if the system is completely dead. I mean, like dead. When you hit the button, there's no clicking, no humming, no buzzing, nothing. Also, if there are no lights in the system anywhere that light up, so no LEDs on the sensors, no LEDs in the wall consoles, and no lights lighting up in the power head assembly. So here are some tips to try to troubleshoot some power issues. Many of these systems get primary power from a plug-in that'll plug into an outlet hanging somewhere near your opener. And then it goes into the power head assembly and gets distributed through wires that run down the rail to the sensors, and sometimes back up into the ceiling or somewhere else, like maybe they run along a wall over to the wall consoles. So all of the components in the system for these types are getting the power from that one outlet. A sign that you may have a bigger power problem is if the lights in the entire system are out. So no lights in the power head assembly, no lights on the sensors, and no lights on the wall consoles could mean that there's no power being distributed throughout the entire system. But if, let's say, for example, my other system over here, these sensors actually have LEDs lit up, even though one's broken, but the wall console, I don't know if you can tell, it's the one on the left, has no LED light in it. So I know that power is making it from the outlet over to the LEDs, but not from the outlet through the head assembly over to the wall consoles. So that could be a wiring issue, or it could be just an issue with that one component. So if you think you have a primary power issue where the entire system isn't getting any power, a good place to start is with the outlet itself to verify that it's giving power to the system. An easy way to do this is if you have a ladder and an extension cord, you can plug a lamp or something into each one of the sockets in the outlet, a lamp that you know is working good. And if the lamp works, then you can tell that the outlet is giving power. So if you're able to verify that the outlet is good in providing power, like I just did, then you're good there and you can move on to checking other parts of the system. But if you're not getting power to the outlet, it's good to check the breaker to make sure one hasn't been tripped. So to check the breaker, find your breaker box. They look like this if you're not familiar with them. You can pop it open. Usually there's a list of what breaker does what in the house, and you can check to see if one of them is for your garage and has been tripped. If it has, you'll see the switch will be in the off position, and you can try to turn it back to the on position. But if the breakers look good, or you reset it and it doesn't do anything and you're still not getting power to the outlet, then that's a good time to call an electrician. Also, one side note, not everybody will have an outlet like this. Some homes will have it wired directly into a power box that looks like this. It'll just be missing the outlet piece and it'll go directly to the power head assembly. If that's your case, case, it's probably best just to call an electrician from the start. So if you verified the source power is good and you have your ladder set up like I do anyway, another good thing to check are the power connections inside of the assembly itself. One way to do this is to make sure you have it plugged in and then check for any kind of status LED inside of the power head assembly. You can see here that mine has an issue and it's blinking a code, and I can look that up in the owner's manual. Just note that not all of them are gonna have LEDs inside, and sometimes they won't be blinking or turned on if nothing is wrong. But if it is blinking like this one, there's a good chance that there's power getting to the boards inside. And this one tries to open, and so I think there's power to the motor as well. But this is a system that we know has an issue with this sensor. And so that's what I think is going on. Another thing you can check to make sure that power is being distributed to the sensors and wall consoles and things like that are these terminals. To do that, first make sure that the system's unplugged if it's not already. And then take a look at these wires. Every opener is gonna have terminals like this in some form. These ones are screw-on, so you use a screwdriver to loosen it and then you can pull the wire out. Some of them will have little tabs that you push, little colored tabs. And some of them may be inside the lighting cover as well, so you may need to open this up to see your terminals. The ones I have here are obviously on the outside, and so I can take a look and not pull hard, but just gently give them a little tug and see if they come out easily. If they pop out, then that's a sign that there was a bad connection there, and I can put it back in and tighten it back down, but all of these are really snug. If everything on the terminals looks good and you still think you have a problem with power inside of the power head assembly, you might need to look at some more of the internal wiring and boards, which means you'll need to remove this inner black cover. All of the models are a little different, but usually there's 3 or 4 screws that you remove and the cover comes off. You can see mine has 4, 2 on each side. If you're not sure where yours are, the owner's manual will tell you where to find them. So I'm gonna pop those off now. So to do this, I'm just using a Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, and now with it open, you can see that we have a motor control board, and another board that distributes all the power and signals to the sensors and wall consoles. Inside of here is also where you would find a capacitor if your system has one. So you want to take a look at the wiring in here and see if anything is loose, broken, or coming off of the motor or the boards, light sockets. You also want to check any fuses to see if they've been blown. It's hard to see, but there's one up in here on the motor control board. And just generally check the boards to see if you see any loose soldering connections or cracks in them. If you find any issues with something like a broken board or a motor, you're probably gonna need to replace those components. Something to think about with these is they're fairly expensive components. In my case, they're in the couple to a few $100 range, depending on what you need, which is nearly the cost of a new opener, so that's something to consider. You could also check the capacitor if yours has one. These are a little bit cheaper to replace. Signs of a bad capacitor are if it's bulging or leaking. There are usually some numbers printed on the side to identify it, and you can get a replacement, and you can also look it up in the owner's manual and it should give you replacement information as well. One note is to be careful with capacitors though. They're a lot like batteries in that they can hold a charge, so depending on the state of your system, there may be some charge in the capacitor. The fluid can also be a little toxic, so try not to get any on you. Also, while you have this open, you can check the drive mechanics on the inside. If you can check your motor couplers, see if anything's broken, check the connections to the motor itself and its mounting. If you have a belt or a chain drive, you'll also have a shaft with gears mounted on it that will be driven by a motor inside, and so you can check those gears to see if any teeth have been worn down or to see if you see any debris inside of the housing that could indicate that the gears are wearing out prematurely. If you do have a chain or belt drive that you find wear inside or broken gears, there are kits that are sold at a reasonable price to replace those. That's it. I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.